Hi, my name is Danielle Isaac. I'm an occupational therapist at Helping Hand Center. This is group 3 of our parent handwriting series. So let me just share my PowerPoint here. So we've been going over various handwriting development. We've been going over the progression of letters, and this group is basically structured to help parents teach their children the basics of handwriting at home. So it's just giving you the fundamentals. So today's main focus is lowercase letters. So today we'll be reviewing a little bit about what we talked about last time. We'll again talk about how to progress through the lowercase letters. We'll also have our tips and tricks section. We're going to be talking about letter reversals today. And then we'll also have our section on how to work on handwriting skills without actually writing. So like I said last week, we worked on we talked about the biomechanical development of handwriting. We talked about our pre-writing strokes and how that leads to capital letters. So once we master pre-writing strokes and shapes, we can move on to the capital letters. We talked a lot about those last week. So how to teach them, how to best approach them. We went over the developmental progression of capital letters. Our tips and tricks section last week was about letters and word spacing, so how to help our kiddos when they're not able to space their letters and words appropriately. And then we talked about fine motor handwriting strategies. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I encourage you to look at last week's parent handwriting group 2. And then if you want to start at the very beginning with our very fundamental basic skills that we reviewed, a more general overview of handwriting, that was in group 1, and all of those are posted as well. So today we're talking about lowercase letters. We have already talked about the shapes, pre-writing shapes and strokes. We've already talked about capitals. Once we master those, or the kiddo has a pretty good understanding of those, then it's time to move on to the lowercase letters. And again, same principle as we talked about before with the capital letters and even with our pre-writing shapes. It's best to move in this progression as well when teaching our lowercase letters. So imitating letters, the child watches you make the lowercase letter and then immediately after writes that lowercase letter right after you. So they're watching that motor planning, they're watching that motor development, and they're able to see it, and then they're able to replicate it. And then moving on to tracing the letters and then going to copying. The letter is already in front of them. They're not watching you make it, and then they're copying it from that paper copy. So that kind of, when we say master, the kiddos are moving from the imitating to tracing to copying. So when kiddos are able to write their letters from a copy is typically when they've mastered that letter. So we'll move on to the next slide here. So the progression of lowercase letters, again, this is very similar to capital letters. We don't teach letters in the alphabetical order. I use the Handwriting Without Tears protocol, or the umbrella Learning Without Tears program. And the reason why is they just do a beautiful job of grouping their letters so that it really follows that developmental sequence of learning where kiddos, those lines occur in a developmental sequence. Kids gain those lines developmentally. So Handwriting Without Tears really follows that when they're teaching their letters. And they account for hand development, the pre-writing gives you a clear order, and the language is awesome with the Handwriting Without Tears, Learning Without Tears program. They essentially teach you exactly what to say so that the kiddos are hearing the same language every single time, and therefore it's easier for them to remember. So I included a couple of links. They're general research Handwriting Without Tears, Learning Without Tears general resource page, but then also the Lowercase Letters formation chart. I really encourage you to check out both of those links. There's a lot more information on there. And I use it all the time. They have so many free resources. And it's so great to be able to, tell families to check it out, to give families their free resources, and then just to use it in my sessions. I use it all the time to make sure that I'm teaching the child the most, relevant, best way. So the second link here, the lowercase letter formation chart, I actually took a screenshot of it because I wanted to show you just how wonderful these tools are. So for the lowercase letters, like I said, it really comes down to teaching the kiddos the correct language so that they're hearing when I make a C, or when I make an A, it's a magic C, up like a helicopter, bump, back down, bump. So they're getting that repetition of language from us, and we're not saying whatever feels right or what comes naturally to us. And it might be different. Like, oh, we're gonna make a half circle and then up, 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 down, slide down, and like next time you're saying something different. And the kiddo is just hearing a variety of language. We all fall victim to that when teaching kiddos handwriting. So what I like about Handwriting Without Tears is they give this very clear language that the kiddo is hearing the same thing over and over again. And lowercase letters are hard. They're not as familiar looking. The kiddos weren't looking at an ABC chart from, they were very little with lowercase letters on it. It was always the capital letters. The capital letters are very simple. They're familiar. They're big. They're bold, what we talked about last time. And lowercase letters are a lot harder. So giving the kiddos this very consistent language is really great for them just being able to learn their letters. So that was lowercase letters. Moving on to our tips and tricks section. This week we're going to review letter and number reversals. And I feel like as an OT, this is I definitely wanted to include this letter and number reversals as a tips and tricks section at some point, because as an OT, it's something that I hear constantly. Parents have concerns, teachers have concerns about letters and number reversals. And a lot of times, and that's why this is the first bullet point, parents assume dyslexia. Does my child have dyslexia? They're reversing a lot of their letters or a lot of their numbers. And I'm very concerned, which is a very fair concern. But I just want to stress that when we see letter reversals, when we see number reversals, we don't want to automatically assume dyslexia or dysgraphia. It's actually very common, and it's actually developmentally appropriate up until age 8 to see letter and number reversals. So I'm going to read this little blurb right here, just because I think it's so important. If your child is struggling with this, this is something positive to hear. Just know that it's developmentally appropriate. Children's brains are still developing. It can take up to 8 years of practicing and understanding letters and bodily concepts that go into handwriting before the brain has integrated all the fine motor, visual perceptual, and coordination skills to automatically write a letter correctly. Typically, reversals are present minimally during first grade. By second grade, children tend to no longer show as many reversal tendencies. But again, they're appropriate up until age 8. So like I said, don't automatically assume, oh my goodness, my child is doing a lot of letter reversals. Do they have dyslexia? There's a lot more to dyslexia than reversals. And it's the concept of letter reversal and number reversals themselves is developmentally appropriate and common. So again, I am going to do my little plug for the Handwriting Without Tears program because it's a great program. And again, they have a magnitude of resources that we can look at if our kiddos are struggling with this. They have kind of a blog post that goes over like different strategies. A lot of the strategies that I'm going to talk about today I learned from going to my own Handwriting Without Tears training courses, and then just things that I've picked up over the years as well. But a lot of them you'll be able to read about in the blog. And then the second link is a great resource. I definitely encourage you to check this out too. And it's actually a free webinar on their website presented by an OT that goes over letter reversals. And it's, like I said, it's a great resource. He talks about the developmental components to it. He talks about different strategies to help your children. It's great. So I definitely encourage you to check that out too. So I keep on saying that letter reversals is developmentally appropriate. So why do we work on it in OT? Why do we address it in schools? Why bring kiddos to your OT and have them spend time working on it? And the reason being is that it is developmentally appropriate, but reversals can slow down writing and make writing frustrating for many children. Reversals prevent automatic writing, so kiddos get slowed down and suddenly writing's no fun because they have to keep stopping and thinking. And like I said, it's still okay prior to age 8 to address it. It's preventative, and it does not mean that your child has any learning disabilities. It's developmentally appropriate, and we just want to make sure that when they do reach that age 8, they have grown out of it and they have mastered the letters, which is why we work on letter reversals in therapy. So tips and tricks, so we're going to move on to these are the actual strategies that you can use to help with letter reversals and numbers. You can help your child orientate the letters. So back in our last group, when we talked about capitals and then numbers as well, we can provide a starting dot. Our capitals and our numbers have very easy starting dots. They always start at the top. They start either in that top left corner or they start in the center. So we can group them that way. And when kiddos are learning to group their letters, they're essentially learning where to start. And if they have a clear start, they're not going to reverse them, or they're going to reverse them a lot less often. And then lowercase letters, we just talked about, they're a lot more complex. So providing a lot of repetition. So if the kiddo is struggling with that letter, it's time to do a lot of repetition with it. Make it fun. We've talked about different sensory strategies, making the letter in shaving cream, building the letter out of Play-Doh. It doesn't have to be just like sit down and write the letter G a million times. It can be a lot of fun, but doing a lot of repetition will help the kiddos with their lowercase letters. And the reason why this tips and tricks section is in the lowercase letters section is because lowercase letters get reversed quite often. There's a lot of them that look very similar, but they go in opposite directions. So we're talking about it here. Work on one letter at a time. Once they master that letter, move on. Sometimes, the kiddo is having a hard time mastering one letter, so you start moving on to other ones just because it feels like we're getting stuck on that. But really focusing on that one letter and then moving on when they're ready will give them the confidence they need to move on. Teach letters in separate groups. We kind of already went over this. Letters can be grouped, and making sure that similar letters are grouped together, and I'll comment on that in a little bit, so you'll get more information. And then Learning Without Tears Wet Dry Try method. I love this method. It's fantastic. It goes over that repetition component and gives them the imitating, it gives them the tracing, and then it also ultimately gives them the copying. So it's a really great method. So basically what it is there's a chalkboard, or you can use a dry erase board, but getting that sensory feedback from the chalkboard is what the program promotes. But you write the letter and with the chalk on the little chalkboard, and then the child, so wet, dry, try. So the child takes a little sponge, and then they trace, very small sponge, so you get those small fingers working on that grass. Take that sponge, and then they trace the letter with the water using the sponge. Then they put the sponge to the side, they take a little wad of paper towel, and they trace that small, with that small wad of paper towel, they trace that letter with the paper towel, so they're drying their letter. And then now, essentially, you clear the board, and then they get to try it themselves, so they get that copying component. So it's a great way of doing repetition. It's multisensory, and it's fun. Kids typically love it. And then I'm not going to talk too much about the letter mystery game, just because the Learning Without Tears program does a lot with it, and you'll learn about it through the webinars. But saying like the letter and like magic C letters, and we're going to talk about those here in a minute, but magic C letters at the C, and then they can magically turn it into an A, magically turn it into a G. So giving the kiddo a part of the letter, like big line down, and magically turn it into an S, or magically turn it into an N, big line down, N. So giving the kiddos a line, or a line, and then having them like guess the letter, the mystery game. It's who knows what we're going to say, but teaching them that, you know, we're starting with this original stroke. That way they're getting that fundamental starting point down. And we just talked about how important starting points are to number and letter reversals, and then they can finish the letter. So the webinar and the Handwriting Without Tears website goes over the mystery game a lot more if you want more information on that. And then, like I promised, we are going to talk about the grouping of letters. So B and D letter reversals are super common. We don't teach B and D together. A lot of other writing programs and just a lot of random things you can find on the internet, they often will be like a search and find kind of thing. There'll be a bunch of B's and a bunch of D's all over the page, and you have to find all the D's within the B's and stuff. Or there's like that bed method that BED, the B goes this way, the D goes this way. It's fine when you're further along and you're just working on just making sure that they have that skill. But when you're initially teaching the kiddos, we don't want to teach C and D together. It's too confusing. So Handwriting Without Tears and myself, I always teach D first because it's used more often in writing. And kiddos typically are able to recognize it better. And then once they learn D, they move on to B. Oops, there we go. So once you learn D, then you move on to B. It's less used in writing, so therefore we do it second. And going on to the grouping of letters, D is a magic C letter. So D is taught typically with C, D, B, G, and Q. And we forgot one other. Okay. So magic C, up like a helicopter, bump, down, bump. You made A. Magic C, up like a helicopter, up higher, down, bump. You made D. So teaching C and then saying all these letters are magic C letters. Oh, my goodness. There we go. Sorry about that. All these letters are magic C letters. And you have to make that C first, and then the letter magically turns into another letter. So grouping D with C and all the other magic C letters will help the kiddos learn the concept of I have to make the letter C first, and then I can turn my letter C into a D. So they're associating D with C, and therefore they know their starting point. And if they know their starting point, they're not going to make a letter B when they are trying to make D. So that's a really cool technique. And I just fixed this, so all the magic C letters are here: C, A, D, G, and Q. And then when you are ready to move on to letter B, Handwriting Without Tears promotes the honeybee letter method. So H and B are very similar. They're a big line down, up like a helicopter, round and over, bump. So H and B are similar. So in honeybee, honey starts with H, B starts with the letter B. So they go together, therefore they're taught together. So kiddos, when they want to make a B, they think of honeybee, and they think of their letter H, and then what is the letter B, but just a little bit around to finish the letter H to turn it into a B. So hopefully those two tricks kind of help with that very common letter reversal. All right, so next we're going to move on to our how to work on handwriting skills without actually writing. This week we're going to go over gross motor techniques. So a lot of times we don't think of gross motor as being something to do to work on handwriting. Handwriting happens typically at the table. Handwriting is a fine motor activity. Why would gross motor help? But gross motor is actually a huge part of handwriting. Gross motor movements and activities can improve hand and upper body strength. We need strength to be able to control our pencil in a coordinated way. It can help with posture, body alignment, and core stability. To sit at that table and write for as long as our kiddos need to in the school system, we have to have proper posture, we have to have proper body alignment and core stability so that they can control proximal to distal. So our inner body out to our hands, distally. And kinesthetic learning of letters is huge with handwriting. To be able to do the gross motor pattern, to act that letter out, to feel that letter, to feel your body moving through the movements that it takes to make that letter. So if I'm going to make the letter B, big line down, up and over, around, bump. So that acting out with that gross motor movements, our letters, is just another multisensory way of helping our kinesthetic learners, our learners that need to feel it with their body to be able to learn. So hand strength and upper body strength. Handwriting is greatly affected by strength because decreased hand strength, decreased upper body strength leads to decreased coordination, pencil control, trunk and core stability at the table, and ultimately stamina. These are our kids that have to do those handshakes after writing for a little while, or get up and run from the table, and you're like, what's going on? You were just doing so great. It's not that they couldn't go on further, and it's not an attention thing. It's just their hands tired and it's hurting them, and we need to build up that stamina of their hand strength so that they can do everything they need to do in school for writing. Core stability. We need to have a stable trunk and trunk control to be able to write. Proximal, so your trunk, your inner body, so all of this up here. Stability promotes distal, so arms and hands are distal, they're at a distance from your trunk. Stability, so make sure your child's feet are firmly planted on the floor. Use a stool, books, etc. to help your child's feet reach a stable surface. If our kiddo, and this goes for things like feeding and eating as well, if our kiddo needs to do something fine motor based at the table that involves a lot of focus, they need that trunk control. And if trunk control is something that they struggle with, if their feet are hanging in the air, just out in space, they have way less trunk control than a child whose feet are firmly planted on the floor. Their feet aren't able to help them with that stability component. So we want to make sure our kiddos have their feet firmly planted on the floor, which is why a kindergartner's desk is not the same as a middle schooler's desk, because it's a lot shorter. They are able to put their feet on the floor. That wasn't an accident. It's not just based on their size. It's also based on trunk control and making sure that they're able to reach the floor. But a lot of times at home, we might not have that set up, and we'll see a lot of times kiddos' feet are just floating in air and they have way less control. And like I said, that also can go for things like feeding and eating. And then a lot of times in the schools and in OT clinics, we try things like backrest, yoga balls, cube chairs for younger learners, plant boards, vertical surfaces, writing while on their bellies, just to kind of try and help them with that core stability and to support them even more. See if that helps their reading. Kinesthetic learning. So basically what this is the multisensory learning involving the manipulation or touching of materials to learn. Usually these techniques are used in combination with visual and auditory techniques as well. So basically kiddos can be kinesthetic learners. And what that means is that in order to learn best, they need to move their body. So when we think of handwriting, how are we going to help our kinesthetic learners with handwriting? And the answer is there are, if you look at the most right column here, there are a lot of gross motor movements that you can do to practice writing. You can do wall balls, so taking a small little tennis ball or something of that size and rolling the ball on the wall so that they are physically making that letter using their body. Walking chalk letters are pretty cool. You can do that. You can do it with chalk on the sidewalk, or you can use painter's tape, and maybe you can have like a letter of the week kind of thing and use tape to make a letter, but have the child walk the letter. They do like a heel-toe balance activity, and if it's the letter D, they have to start at the top, big line down, so they're going to walk a big line down, and then they're going to frog jump back up to the top, and then they're going to do a big curve, and they're going to walk heel-toe on that big curve all the way back down to the bottom. So it's just a really cool activity to get the kiddos recognizing the letter patterns, what comes first, what comes second, what comes third when making letter lines for individual letters, and then having them move their bodies in the process. It's a fun activity. And then kind of going off of like the wall ball letters, you can use scarves or towels and do letters in the air. It's a little less coordination required to keep that ball up. So that can be helpful for our younger learners. And then dry erase window letters, or a chalkboard, and just writing those letters out on that big vertical surface will help get that arm moving and help making those big movements. So that can help with our kinesthetic learners as well. And then I also want to talk about the sections called How to Work on Handwriting Without Actually Writing. So I want to talk about how important just gross motor strengthening is, and for our upper body strengthening, our hand strengthening, and our core. Yoga involves a lot of core strengthening. It involves a lot of weight bearing on our hands and arms, which is going to strengthen our hands and arms. Animal walks, same thing. Doing those bear walks, doing those crab walks, getting your body in different positions to strengthen the core and the upper body. And then playground play that's the most occupation focused, that play, that functional play, where the kiddos are climbing, they're hanging, they're doing so many great things to keep their body upwards and just to engage that core and to strengthen their arms and their hands. Wheelbarrow walks kind of ties in with our animal walks and yoga walks. It's when the parent grabs the child's feet and they are walking on their hands. So as you can imagine, that takes a lot of core strength to stay upwards. It takes a ton of upper body strength. It's really, really great for kiddos who are working on strengthening for their upper body. And then again, another functional play activity, tug of war, using a bath towel or a beach towel or a safe rope to play tug of war is going to engage the core and the upper body and the hands for strengthening. So these are just some ways to work on writing without actually writing. And that is it for today. So today we reviewed a lot with our lowercase letters. There's a lot of resources on Learning Without Tears, Handwriting Without Tears website that encourage you to check out letter reversals and then our gross motor. So I hope you guys learned a lot. Our next group and our final group is going to be a little bit shorter, and it's going to be all about cursive. So stay tuned.